They'll call this idea absurd. They always do. Because it wounds them. Because it exposes the soft underbelly of modern man, the one who kneels before comfort, worships mediocrity, and confuses ease with evolution. Nietzsche's Übermensch? Absurd, they say. But what's truly absurd is a civilization that praises conformity and calls it virtue. A culture that silences its fire and claps for its own extinction. I didn't invent the Übermensch to inspire you. I wrote him like a scream, an indictment. I carved him out of my own suffering, my own rage, my own war with meaning. He wasn't meant for you. He was meant against you, against the cowardice dressed as decency, against the herd dragging genius through the mud, against the endless worship of weakness. What's absurd is not the Übermensch. It's the idea that anyone could look at the ruins of modern thought and still believe in moral certainty, still cling to borrowed truths, still beg for purpose without paying its price. The Übermensch isn't absurd. He's the answer to your silence, but don't worry, you won't have to become him. You'll just have to face the fact that you never will. And in that fracture, that unbearable realization, maybe, just maybe, something dangerous will awaken. They always get it wrong. From the very first mention of the Übermensch in Also, sprach Zarathustra, people twisted it into a cartoon, some muscle-bound ideal, some perfect being, some heroic savior. Ridiculous. I wasn't offering salvation. I was challenging damnation. I was throwing a spear at the son of mediocrity, not painting a mural of perfection. But they wanted a mascot, not a mirror. The Übermensch wasn't a goal for society. It was a judgment against it. A declaration that most people, most values, most virtues were empty, inherited, lifeless. A corpse dragging itself through morality. I used the word overman because I needed to insult the current man, the petty one, the cowardly one, the one who needs gods and rules to feel worthy of breathing. I wanted to make people uncomfortable, not inspired, but it's hard to get that across when they translate your ideas into superhero movies. Suddenly the Übermensch is caped, charming, and moral. My God, I said God was dead, and they still made one out of me. The whole point was transcendence, not obedience. Creation, not imitation. Pain, not popularity. But mediocrity always wins the first interpretation. They read Nietzsche like a self-help manual, but it was a suicide note to civilization as it is. A demand to become the artist of one's life, not the product of one's culture. They read it and asked, how do I become the Superman? When the real question is, can you even survive the void he demands you face? That's the origin. Not hope, not glory, but agony, and yet the misreading itself is revealing. It exposes what people need the Übermensch to be, not what he is. Which leads me to a darker realization. God is dead. They love to quote it. They wear it like a badge, ironic, edgy, intellectual. But they never stay long enough to hear the scream behind the sentence. It wasn't a victory cry. It was a funeral dirge. Not a joke, a prophecy. I didn't kill God to make room for nihilism. I exposed nihilism as the rot already spreading beneath society's skin. And still, they misread it like a clever tweet. When I wrote it, I saw the collapse before it happened. The church was no longer sacred. The commandments no longer believed. Science had severed the roots of belief, but left the hollow trunk of morality standing. And yet, society kept pretending it could live with Christian ethics after throwing out the Christian God. Absurd. A moral scaffolding with no foundation underneath. How long do you think that can last? They think the Übermensch replaces God. No, he replaces the illusion. Not with comfort, with chaos, with responsibility, with a new kind of burden. You want freedom? Fine, but now you carry the weight of meaning alone. There's no sky daddy to whisper purpose into your dreams. No eternal reward. No punishment. Just you, your will, and the abyss. But most people don't want that. They want a new God, just dressed differently. A higher self, a life coach, a mindset. They want heaven without holiness. Progress without pain. Meaning without sacrifice. So they misunderstand God is dead the same way they misunderstand the Übermensch. They pretend it's a door to comfort when it's actually a cliff. And if they fear the fall, they cling to the herd, that same herd that always panics when the old gods stop answering. Which leads us straight into the next lie they keep telling themselves. They say they love greatness. They lie. The herd fears greatness, not because it threatens them physically, but because it reminds them of their own smallness. The moment someone rises above, creates, dares, the herd surrounds and suffocates. It calls that person arrogant, dangerous, insane. And in that accusation, it reveals its true morality. Equality at all costs, even if it means dragging brilliance into the dirt. Herd morality isn't about compassion. It's about control, about making sure no one escapes the pen. It dresses itself up as kindness, but underneath, it's envy wearing a smile. It tells you to be humble, to sacrifice, to conform, and calls it virtue. Why? Because if you start listening to your own will, your own truth, you threaten their entire structure. One free soul makes 1,000 slaves feel their chains. The Übermensch spits in the face of this morality. He doesn't obey, he creates. He doesn't sacrifice, he overcomes. But here's the twist. The herd doesn't just reject him, it doesn't even see him. His values are so far beyond theirs, they seem like madness. They measure him with the wrong scale and call him evil because he doesn't kneel where they do. This is why real transformation is always met with mockery first, then outrage, then silence. They kill the prophets, then build temples in their name. Because to embrace the truth of someone who transcends you, you have to admit your own cowardice. And that's a price most won't pay. So they return to their comfort, their slogans, their borrowed morals, unaware that they've just buried the only path out of mediocrity. But if comfort is king, then power is dead, or is it? People speak of freedom, but they chase comfort. They chant about change, but they worship routine. What they call growth is often just avoidance in disguise. The will to power, my true axis of human evolution, isn't about domination. It's not about ruling others. It's about ruling oneself. It's the force behind creation, destruction, transformation. But most would trade it in a heartbeat for a blanket and a dopamine hit. Comfort is a silent tyrant. It whispers, stay where you are. It's safe here. Don't stretch. Don't suffer. But there is no Übermensch without discomfort, without the burn, without the endless confrontation with who you are and the even harder task of becoming someone else. The will to power demands risk, and most frankly, are cowards. I wasn't writing for the average man when I spoke of power. I wasn't writing for the comfortable. I was writing to the one burning inside, the one choking on the artificial sweetness of modern life, the one who senses that numbing yourself is not the same as being alive. That kind of soul doesn't want relief. It wants resistance. It wants weight to lift. But instead of pursuing power, people now pursue performance, applause, virality, comfort dressed up as confidence. And when they break, because they always do, they blame the world, never the cage they built with their own choices. Because real power would have required them to tear down everything they thought made them good. The Übermensch doesn't avoid suffering, he uses it. He needs it. It is the furnace in which his meaning is forged. That's why most people will never meet him. They're too busy avoiding the fire that could have made them real. And this misunderstanding leads to an even deeper tragedy. They keep confusing him with a savior, a messiah, a new moral guide. But the Übermensch was never meant to be a hero. He doesn't rescue. He doesn't lead. He doesn't represent anyone. He becomes, and that becoming is a solitary act. There is no applause at the end. No victory parade, only silence and the heavy breath of someone who just birthed themselves. The desire for heroes is just the herd begging for permission to stay asleep. If someone else embodies courage, they don't have to. If someone else confronts chaos, they can remain in comfort. The Übermensch isn't here to inspire. He exists to shame mediocrity by comparison. His life doesn't say, follow me. It says, look what you could be and aren't. That's why the Übermensch walks alone, not because he hates others, but because no one can carry the burden of self-overcoming for you. He doesn't sacrifice for the group. He doesn't play the martyr. He doesn't lower himself to be understood. He rises, and the world either watches in awe or turns away in fear. Modern culture craves heroes who are relatable, flawed, softened, but the Übermensch isn't meant to be digestible. He's meant to be unreachable, not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to go where most won't, into the dark, into the absurd, into the painful contradictions of existence, and come out creating and not just surviving. They want a guide, but I gave them a mirror, and when they saw their reflection in his shadow, they called it absurd. Because if he's not here to save them, what does that say about the world they've built? That question they avoid, but their avoidance only deepens the misunderstanding. It's almost poetic. The philosopher of self-overcoming, twisted into a symbol of superiority or despair. They either idolize me as some elitist prophet or dismiss me as a madman who cracked under pressure. Both are wrong. But in their misreading, they reveal exactly what I was writing about: the incapacity of the average mind to handle complexity without mutilating it. They quote me out of context. They isolate phrases like "God is dead" or "will to power" and wear them like intellectual accessories, edgy, rebellious, but ultimately hollow. They don't live these ideas. They don't wrestle with them in the silence of their own mind. They don't suffer through their implications. They turn my philosophy into branding. Nietzsche, the misunderstood genius, the tattoo, the Instagram caption. I wasn't writing for them. I was writing for the few, the ones who can stare into the abyss and not blink. The ones who feel the nausea of freedom and don't run from it. But even they sometimes cling to the wrong parts. They treat my words as scripture when I was trying to destroy the very idea of scriptures. I didn't want followers, I wanted flames. Burning through convention, identity, and morality itself. That's the tragedy. My work was never meant to be interpreted easily. It was meant to be endured, to be felt. I wrote aphorisms like landmines, compact, explosive, unpredictable. But in a world addicted to answers, people turn my questions into doctrines. And in doing so, they buried the dangerous power those ideas once held. And yet, even in misinterpretation, something survives. A residue, a shadow of the real thing. Because behind every cheap quote, there still lingers a dangerous possibility that someone might read just one line the right way and never see the world the same again, which leads into the next absurdity. I called it Beyond Good and Evil, not beyond likes and comments. But maybe that's the real subtitle today, because the average person isn't confronting morality anymore. They're curating it, filtering it, performing it for the algorithm. What was once a battlefield of values has become a marketplace of virtue signaling. The Übermensch would vomit. You can't transcend morality if you've never questioned it. And how could they? Their entire existence is built on external approval. Every action, every belief, every opinion is shaped to avoid rejection. They fear being cast out of the digital tribe more than they fear wasting their one life. So instead of thinking, they post. Instead of suffering, they scroll. The Übermensch is about creation, new values, born from the ashes of the old. But how can you create if you've never deconstructed? If you've never torn the scaffolding of morality down to its bones and asked, do I actually believe this? Most won't, because the answers might demand change. And comfort once again wins. Even rebellion has become branded. The same systems that once oppressed now monetize dissent. You want to challenge the system? Great, there's a t-shirt for that. A hashtag, a sponsorship. But transcendence doesn't trend. It isolates. It destroys who you were. That's why it's so rare. Not because it's impossible, but because it's unbearable. So no, most can't get beyond good and evil. They can't even get beyond what's popular. And in that cage of perception, the very idea of the Übermensch becomes laughable, absurd, offensive, which is exactly why slave morality still reigns. It never left. It just changed clothes. What once wore chains and crosses now wears causes and compassion, but the mechanism is the same. Slave morality doesn't fight power. It reshapes it to serve the weak. It doesn't demand strength. It glorifies weakness and calls it virtue. And worst of all, it makes guilt the highest currency. They think morality evolved, that we've become more civilized, but I see it differently. I see a world where victimhood is weaponized, where outrage is profitable, and where envy wears the mask of justice. The herd hasn't abolished power, it's inverted it. Now the one who suffers most speaks loudest. The one who dares the least accuses the most. It's moral revenge, disguised as compassion. The Übermensch has no place in such a world. He's not humble enough, not guilty enough, not broken enough. He's too sovereign, too self-defined. And so they call him dangerous, evil, arrogant, because he refuses to kneel where others worship. Because he refuses to validate a system that rewards the suppression of excellence. Slave morality teaches people to fear their instincts, to distrust their ambition, to crucify their desire. It says, if you shine too brightly, you're selfish. If you speak too boldly, you're oppressive. And little by little, it cuts the wings off potential until all that's left is a flattened mass of quiet, obedient, well-meaning shadows. But the tragedy is deeper still. Many have absorbed this morality so completely they don't even see it anymore. It's not a system they live under. It's the blood in their veins. And breaking free from it would require a kind of inner violence most aren't willing to commit. A radical act of self-overcoming. And speaking of self-overcoming, I didn't say self-improvement. I said self-overcoming. And there's a world of pain between those two ideas. Improvement is safe. It plays by the rules. It updates the software but keeps the same operating system. Self-overcoming, though. That's demolition. It's slaughtering your past selves and walking away without mourning. It's rebirth, without the comfort of a womb. People talk about change, but they want permission. They want a blueprint, a 5-step plan, a podcast episode to guide them gently through the fire. But the fire burns for a reason. It strips you of identity, and not everyone comes out the other side. Because real transformation demands the death of everything that made you lovable, tolerable, and easy to digest. It's ugly, it's violent, it's sacred. I demanded the impossible, and I knew it. I wrote not for the many, but for the rare. The one who feels an inner tension that never resolves. The one who senses that their worst enemy isn't out there, it's in the mirror. That's who I meant when I spoke of the Übermensch. Not a perfect man, but a willing one. One who dares to become a stranger to himself. But in today's world, that concept is foreign. They want alignment, balance, authenticity. I want confrontation, dissonance, war within the soul. The soft language of self-help has replaced the brutal art of self-conquest. And what we get as a result is a civilization of half-formed beings who mistake therapy for transformation. Still, the need for self-overcoming never dies. It lurks beneath the surface of every comfort, every addiction, every restless night. The soul knows what it must become, but most people bury that knowledge in pleasure. And what happens when that pleasure runs dry? We return to the same old fate. They misunderstood eternal return too. Of course they did. They turned it into a thought experiment, a cute philosophical riddle. Would you live your life over again, exactly as it is, forever? But they missed the poison at its core. I wasn't asking them to like their lives. I was asking if they could endure the unbearable weight of repetition, if they could love their fate so completely they'd embrace it eternally. Amor fati, but for most, the idea is unbearable, not because of suffering, but because of mediocrity, the sameness, the dullness, the quiet, unremarkable repetition of a life never fully lived. That's the real terror. Not hell, not torment, but being stuck forever in the version of yourself that never became, that never dared, that never disobeyed. And yet, that's already happening. People are repeating themselves every day. Same habits, same fears, same excuses. Eternal return isn't some metaphysical threat. It's psychological truth. Most are living loops, not lives. walking in circles while convincing themselves they're moving forward. Mediocrity isn't just a condition, it's a sentence. I offered eternal return, not as comfort but as a hammer. If you can't affirm your life as it is, then change it. Smash it, rebuild it, or accept that you're choosing this loop. Every action, every choice, every avoidance, repeated forever. That's the cost of comfort. That's the consequence of refusing self-overcoming. You don't escape hell, you become it. And what's worse, you'll decorate it, smile in it, post it, pretend you chose it. That's the final trick of mediocrity. It disguises itself as contentment. But deep down, your soul remembers what it was meant for. It remembers the call of the Übermensch. And sometimes it hears echoes of that call in the strangest places. They misunderstood eternal return too. Of course they did. They turned it into a thought experiment. A cute philosophical riddle. Would you live your life over again, exactly as it is, forever? But they missed the poison at its core. I wasn't asking them to like their lives. I was asking if they could endure the unbearable weight of repetition, if they could love their fate so completely they'd embrace it eternally. Amor fati, but for most, the idea is unbearable, not because of suffering, but because of mediocrity, the sameness, the dullness, the quiet, unremarkable repetition of a life never fully lived. That's the real terror. Not hell, not torment, but being stuck forever in the version of yourself that never became, that never dared, that never disobeyed. And yet, that's already happening. People are repeating themselves every day. Same habits, same fears, same excuses. Eternal return isn't some metaphysical threat. It's psychological truth. Most are living loops, not lives, walking in circles while convincing themselves they're moving forward. Mediocrity isn't just a condition, it's a sentence. I offered eternal return, not as comfort but as a hammer. If you can't affirm your life as it is, then change it. Smash it, rebuild it, or accept that you're choosing this loop. Every action, every choice, every avoidance, repeated forever. That's the cost of comfort. That's the consequence of refusing self-overcoming. You don't escape hell, you become it. And what's worse, you'll decorate it, smile in it, post it, pretend you chose it. That's the final trick of mediocrity. It disguises itself as contentment. But deep down, your soul remembers what it was meant for. It remembers the call of the Übermensch. And sometimes it hears echoes of that call in the strangest places. They call it progress. I call it sterilization. Modern man has become efficient, polite, productive, but spiritually dead. He no longer howls, no longer rages, no longer creates from the raw violence of being alive. He's been declawed by comfort, tamed by routine, and medicated into submission. Civilization didn't elevate him. It domesticated him. What once roared in caves now whispers in cubicles. He follows rules he didn't write, believes in systems he doesn't understand, and measures his worth in likes, salaries, and titles. He's surrounded by technology, but starved of purpose. They tell him he's free, but only if he obeys the unspoken commandments of modern life. Don't offend, don't feel too much, don't question too deeply. The caged animal forgets he's in a cage. That's the trick. He decorates it, optimizes it, calls it home. He praises his ability to cope, not realizing he was never meant to cope. He was meant to create. But creation requires confrontation, with chaos, with fear, with self. And modern man avoids all three. He doesn't overcome. He escapes. I wrote about the Übermensch not as a utopia, but as a contrast, a reminder of what was lost. The creator, the destroyer, the one who carves values out of void. But that kind of man is rare now, because he's punished. Not with violence, but with invisibility. He doesn't fit, so he's ignored. And that is the most brutal exile of all. Modern man believes he's evolved because he has convenience. But what he lost was danger, and with it the possibility of greatness. And in this sterile world, even philosophy itself begins to rot, turning into memes, quotes, and content no heavier than air. They took my words, my rage, my sorrow, my rebellion, and turned them into content. I wasn't writing punchlines. I was carving wounds. But now, My deepest insights are sliced into 10-second clips, plastered over cinematic stock footage with dramatic piano music. Philosophy didn't just lose its danger, it became digestible, shareable, harmless. Become who you are, they post, with no idea what it costs to even begin that process. He who has a why can bear any how, they quote, while running from even the faintest discomfort. They repeat my words like spells, hoping for transformation, but never realizing that those words were the result of transformation, not the cause of it. You don't get to cite Nietzsche without confronting yourself. But they do it daily, smiling. It's not just me. They've done this to all of us. Kierkegaard, Jung, Camus, reduced to aesthetic vibes. Complexity flattened, pain sanitized. Philosophy is no longer a mirror. It's a marketing tool. It's sold back to the same people it once condemned, wrapped in inspirational edits and life hack playlists. The herd consumes it not to change, but to feel briefly deep. This is the final humiliation, not being hated, being misunderstood, being loved for the wrong reasons, being turned into a mascot for a culture I warned against. I didn't want to be viral. I wanted to be venomous. My ideas were meant to unsettle, to shake the soul out of its slumber, not to trend on TikTok between gym montages and self-help gurus. And yet, even in this diluted form, something remains. A residue, a spark, because once the mask falls, and it always falls, people are left with themselves and with the unbearable weight of meaninglessness. And in that moment, maybe they'll realize what true freedom demands. Everyone claims to want freedom. They shout it, tattoo it, die for it, but they don't understand it. They think freedom means doing what you want. No, true freedom means having no one to blame. No gods, no masters, no moral frameworks holding your hand through life. Just you and the raw terror of existence without a script. That's not liberation. That's weight. The Übermensch is free not because he escaped rules, but because he created his own. And that act, creation, demands total responsibility. Not just for what you do, but for who you become. That's the part they can't handle. People say they want meaning, but they want it delivered, packaged, pre-approved. They want purpose without the pain of invention. When the old gods die, new burdens rise. You don't just lose divine judgment, you lose the comfort of being told what's right, what's valuable, what's enough. Suddenly you're standing in a void, and most would rather run back to dogma, any dogma, than stay in that silence long enough to hear themselves. Because in that silence you realize you are the author now, and the page is blank. That's the price of becoming. Not comfort, not praise, the weight of freedom. The weight of knowing that you are the source of meaning in your life, and no one else is coming. No savior, no system. Just you, your will, and the fire you're willing to walk through. So yes, freedom is beautiful, but it's also brutal. It's the final test of the soul, and most would rather kneel than carry that burden. But the few who dare to carry it, they step into something terrifying, something holy, something that looks a lot like solitude. He walks alone, not because he wants to, but because he must. The Übermensch is not a leader, not a preacher, not a symbol. He is a consequence. A byproduct of confronting the abyss and not looking away. And when you've seen that deep into nothingness, you realize how few others have. That's when the solitude begins. Not the romantic kind, the existential kind. He isn't isolated by force, but by transformation. His thoughts no longer fit the world. His values clash with the culture. His laughter offends. His silence unnerves. He sees games being played, social, moral, political, and finds them absurd. He no longer belongs to the herd because he burned the map they all use to find meaning. And when you burn the map, you lose the crowd. People call him arrogant, cold, detached. But they don't see the grief underneath. The grief of leaving behind the comfort of belonging. The ache of becoming unrecognizable, even to yourself. That's the solitude I speak of. Not loneliness, but estrangement. From convention, from expectation, from everything you were taught to worship, and yet that solitude is not a curse. It's a crucible. It sharpens, it clarifies. In the absence of approval, only truth survives. That's why the Übermensch doesn't need applause. His very existence is his statement. Not loud, not desperate, just undeniable. A force, a fracture in the fabric of normality. Still, most will never see him. They'll call his vision absurd, dangerous, inhuman. And maybe it is. Maybe he is absurd, but only to a world that has forgotten what it means to become something greater than human. They call the Übermensch absurd because they can't imagine a life not built on validation. They see a man who creates his own values, who walks without gods, who bears the unbearable, and they laugh. Not because he's funny, but because they're afraid. And laughter is how the herd defends itself against what it can't comprehend. But the truth is this, the Übermensch isn't absurd. He's accurate. He's not fantasy, he's inevitable. A response to the collapse of old meaning, to the silence left by dead gods and broken systems. He's what happens when you look at the void and don't flinch. When you refuse to fill it with lies. Most people can't do that, so they reject him. Not intellectually, but existentially. And I understand, truly. I never expected the masses to follow. I expected them to mock, to twist, to distort, because the Übermensch exposes them. He reveals the scaffolding of their comfort. He doesn't need approval, so he threatens their entire psychological economy. He lives by a logic they've never tasted, not because it's elite, but because it's earned. He is not absurd. He's just not meant for the average human. And that is not elitism. It is biology, spirit, will. Some souls are born with the capacity to endure the truth. Most aren't, and that's fine. But they should know this. Just because something is beyond you doesn't mean it's invalid. Just because it's brutal doesn't mean it's false. So yes, laugh. Call it absurd. Turn him into a meme. But know this, while you perform life, the Übermensch creates it. While you cling to meaning, he becomes it. And that silent act of becoming will outlive all your laughter. If anything from this reached you, then remember this line. Just because it's beyond you doesn't mean it's invalid. Let them comment. Let them mock. The Übermensch doesn't need to be understood. He just needs to exist. And existence, real, unfiltered, self-created existence, is already a revolution.